My son called and asked if my wife could stay with him just for 10 days. My little girl misses her grandma, he said gently. My wife already prepared the guest room, but on the fourth day, my wife vanished from every call. No answer, no message, just silence. A terrible feeling hit me, so I drove through the night to my son's house. Before I could even step out, a little girl tapped my car window and whispered, "Sir, call someone now. Your wife is locked behind your son's house." My blood turned cold. I am grateful you are here with me today. Before we go further, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I read everyone. A note: this story contains fictional elements crafted for both entertainment and educational purposes. Any similarity to actual names or places is coincidental, but the lesson it carries is one worth keeping. The fog was still sitting on the lake when I poured my second cup. 4 acres of Georgia waterfront, and most mornings I couldn't see past the dock. Vivien always said the fog was peaceful. I had stopped arguing with her about it years ago. After 31 years of marriage, you learn which battles are worth having before breakfast. I sat in the old wicker chair on the back porch and let the coffee warm my hands. Inside, I could hear Vivien moving around the kitchen, the particular sound of her morning routine, the cabinet above the sink opening and closing, the soft tap of her mug on the counter. 40 years I had known those sounds. They were as familiar to me as my own breathing. My name is Walter Renfield. I spent 22 years as a federal civil court judge before I retired 5 years ago. Contract fraud, estate disputes, financial crimes, the kind of cases where somebody always believed they were smarter than the paperwork. Most of the time, they were wrong. I thought about my son's phone call. That had been last Tuesday. "Hey, Dad, got a quick question." Daniel's voice had been easy, casual, the voice he used when he wanted something to sound smaller than it was. "Have you and Mom thought about updating your trust documents lately? You know, just to make sure everything's current. Serena does estate work, she'd be happy to take a look." No charge, obviously. I had been in the garage when he called, checking the oil on Vivien's car. I remember I set the dipstick down on the fender very carefully before I answered. "We're fine, son," I said. "Yeah, no, I know. I just thought with everything going on in the market, it might be smart to—" "Daniel." I kept my voice even. "We're fine." A pause. 2, maybe 3 seconds. "Sure, Dad. Of course. Just trying to help." "I know you are." We talked for another 10 minutes about football and the weather, and by the end of it, he sounded perfectly normal, and I sounded perfectly normal. And when I hung up, I stood in the garage for a long time without picking the dipstick back up. In 22 years on the bench, I had heard hundreds of questions that were not questions. They have a texture to them, too smooth, too practiced, like a stone that's been turned over in someone's hand for a long time, before they finally showed it to you. Daniel's question had that texture. Parents with healthy finances don't get asked about their trust documents by their children. Not out of nowhere. Not with that particular kind of casual that takes effort to sound effortless. I picked up my coffee and watched the fog move across the water. People ask about estate documents when they have already started counting. That was the thing I could not get out of my head sitting on that porch, listening to Vivien hum something in the kitchen. They ask when they have already decided what they want. The only thing left to figure out is how to get it. Task 1.2. The call came on a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks later. Vivien picked up before I could reach it. I heard her voice change from the other room, that particular warmth that only happened when Daniel called. I set down my book and listened. "Oh, sweetheart, of course I remember the address, Jacksonville, right?" A pause. "The new house already." Well, how does it look? I walked to the doorway. She was standing at the kitchen counter, one hand pressed to her chest, the way she did when she was happy about something. Lily's been asking for me. Her face lit up completely. Walter, Daniel says Lily's been drawing pictures of me. She taped one to her bedroom door. I sat down at the kitchen table. That's sweet, I said. She put the call on speaker. Daniel's voice filled the room, warm, unhurried, the sound of a man with nothing to hide. Dad, hey. I was just telling Mom we'd love to have her come up for about 10 days. Show her the new place, let Lily spend some time with her grandmother. Serena's been stretched thin with work, and honestly, having Mom around would be good for everybody. That sounds real nice, I said. The house backs up to a creek. Mom, you would love it. There's a whole trail you can walk in the mornings. I know how you like your morning walks. Vivien looked at me across the table with the expression that meant she had already decided and was checking whether I had any objections. I had none that I could prove. When were you thinking? I asked. Weekend after next, we'd drive her back, or she could fly if she'd rather. Whatever's easier. I'll drive myself, thank you very much, Vivien said, and Daniel laughed and I smiled because the moment required it. After she hung up, she was already thinking about what to pack. 10 days isn't so long, she said, folding a dish towel that didn't need folding. And Lily really does ask about me. She told me on my birthday she wished I lived closer. I know she does, I said. You'll be all right here by yourself. I've managed before. She smiled and went to find her suitcase, and I sat at the kitchen table and listened to her footsteps move down the hall. Every word Daniel had said was correct. That was the problem. Real conversation wanders. Real conversation has wrong turns and forgotten thoughts and moments that go nowhere. Daniel's call had moved in a straight line from start to finish, each detail landing exactly where it needed to land. That night, after Vivien had gone to sleep, I drove 12 miles to Martin Albright's law office. Martin had been our family attorney for 18 years and used my key to the after-hours document drop. Inside, I placed our original trust documents, the property deed, both vehicle titles, and our complete financial account records. I left copies in the home safe. I left everything looking exactly as it always had. I drove home in the dark and came to bed quietly. I did not tell Vivien. Some fears are better carried alone, not because you are keeping secrets, but because until you have something real to show for them, they are just the habits of an old man who spent too many years watching people lie. She called the first night at 7:15, right on schedule. Walter, you would not believe this kitchen. Her voice was bright the way it got when she was genuinely delighted about something. It's got one of those islands in the middle, you know, the big ones with the stools, and a window over the sink that looks straight out at the creek. Sounds nice, I said. I was in the armchair with a book I hadn't opened yet. Lily drew a picture of the creek and taped it to the refrigerator already. She's been drawing all day. Daniel says she went through half a sketchbook before lunch. How's the drive treat you? 5 hours, but the traffic wasn't bad. Walter, the backyard, there's a whole trail along the water. I walked part of it before dinner. You would like it. I'm sure I would. We talked for 40 minutes that first night. She told me about the guest room, the good mattress, the way Serena had put fresh flowers on the nightstand. She sounded happy. I told her I was glad and meant it, and after we hung up, I sat in the quiet house and listened to it settle around me. The second night, she called at 7 again. This time, the conversation started the same way Lily had done something funny at breakfast. The trail was even better in the morning light Daniel had grilled out on the back porch. Then, about 15 minutes in, her voice dropped just slightly. Walter. Yeah. There's something about this house. A pause. I can't put my finger on it. It's silly. What kind of something? I don't know. A feeling. Another pause, shorter. Serena's been very attentive. She checks on me a lot. Brings me tea before bed every night. It's kind, I know it's kind, I just... She stopped. Never mind. I'm probably just tired from the drive. It's not silly, I said. What kind of tea? Chamomile, I think. It's sweet, she puts honey in it. Her voice brightened again, deliberately. Lily wants me to read to her tonight. I should go. All right. Call me tomorrow. I always do. The third night, her call came at 7:30 instead of 7. Her voice was lighter than the night before, too light the way a voice gets when someone has decided to sound fine. We talked about Lily's drawings and a restaurant Daniel had suggested for the weekend. She laughed twice at things that weren't quite funny enough to laugh at. I said goodnight and told her I loved her. Love you too, honey, she said. Talk tomorrow. The fourth night, the phone didn't ring. I waited until 8, then 9. Then I called her cell phone, and it rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I sat in the armchair and looked at the clock and listened to the house. 8 o'clock, 9, 10, 11. In 38 years of marriage, Vivien had never let a day end without calling. Not once. Not even the year she was in the hospital for her hip and the nurses had to hold the phone for her. Not once. Task 1.4. I called Daniel's number the next morning at 7:45. He picked up on the second ring. Dad. Hey. Easy. Relaxed. The voice of a man who had been expecting the call. Daniel, I haven't heard from your mother since Tuesday night. Yeah, she had a rough night, actually. Didn't sleep great. She's been resting all morning. I didn't want to wake her. Can you put her on? She's really out, Dad. I'll have her call you when she's up, okay? I looked out the kitchen window at the lake. All right, I said. Have her call me. She didn't call. That evening I tried again. This time it rang 3 times before Daniel answered. She went out with Serena, he said. They went to that outdoor market downtown. She's been wanting to go since she got here. At 6:30 in the evening, a half-second pause. They went for dinner after. You know how she gets when she's shopping, loses track of time completely. I do know how she gets, I said. That's why this doesn't sound like her. Dad. His voice stayed warm, but there was something underneath it now, something careful. She's fine. She's having a good time. I think she just needed a break, from the routine. Don't take it personally. I didn't say anything for a moment. Tell her to call me, I said. Tonight. Absolutely. She didn't call that night either. Or the next morning. I tried her cell phone 6 times over 2 days and got voicemail every time. Daniel answered twice more, once to say she was napping, once to say she had gone to bed early with a headache. Each answer was smooth. Each one had a reason that made just enough sense to almost work. On the 7th day, I went to the bedroom closet and pulled down the duffel bag from the top shelf. I packed 3 days of clothes, my medication, my phone charger, and the small notebook I had carried since my first year on the bench. I didn't call Daniel to tell him I was coming. Judges don't announce themselves when they want the truth. They show up. I drove south on I-95 with the radio off. There is a particular kind of quiet that happens on a highway at 2 in the morning, the kind where the only sound is the road under your tires and the occasional flash of headlights going the other way. I had driven this stretch of interstate more times than I could count. Tonight it felt different. Tonight I was reading it like a case file. Item 1. 3 weeks ago, Daniel asked about our trust documents. No prior history of interest in our estate. No financial context that would explain the question. Out of nowhere. Item 2, he invited Vivien to Jacksonville 10 days later. Vivien specifically, not both of us. Item 3, she stopped calling on day 4, and item 4, the one I had not let myself look at directly in 6 months, was the phone call I received last May from a man named Roy Delaney. Roy and I had worked parallel tracks for years, him as a senior field agent out of the FBI's Jacksonville field office, me on the civil bench. We had crossed paths on financial fraud cases enough times that when he called, I always picked up. "Walter," he had said, "I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to hear it as professional courtesy, not accusation. You aware of a company called Hearthside Senior Consulting out of Jacksonville?" I had gone very still. "What about it?" I said. "We've been looking at a pattern. Elderly clients signing over property rights, durable power of attorney liquidating accounts. Company facilitates the paperwork. Clients later claim they didn't understand what they were signing, or that they were not themselves at the time of signing." Roy: "I know whose company it is, Walter. That's why I'm calling you instead of somebody else. We don't have enough to move yet. I just thought you should know." I had thanked him. I had said I would look into it. I had hung up the phone and sat in my study for a long time. And then I had decided that Roy was wrong, that there was an explanation, that Daniel had built something legitimate, that a father who spent 22 years convicting people had simply learned to see criminals where there weren't any. I had decided that for 6 months, the Georgia state line passed in the dark somewhere behind me. The Florida welcome sign caught my headlights for a second and was gone. I had 6 months of doing nothing, and Vivien was somewhere in Jacksonville, and I had not heard her voice in 4 days. I pressed the accelerator and watched the speedometer climb, and I did not look away from the road. Task 2.2. I reached the neighborhood at 5:20 and parked 1 block north of Daniels Street. The subdivision was called Heronwood, the kind of planned community that looked identical from every angle, beige houses and manicured lawns and streetlights that turned everything the color of old paper. At this hour, it was completely still. Nobody on the sidewalks, no lights in any windows except one kitchen 2 doors down where someone was moving around in the early dark. I cut the engine and waited. At 5:30, I saw it. A white cargo van parked directly in front of Daniel's house, the kind with no rear windows and a logo on the side panel. I took my reading glasses from my jacket pocket and leaned forward. MedVantage Patient Transport. A phone number. A small red cross above the lettering. I sat back in my seat. Private medical transport companies are not unusual. People use them after surgeries during illness when a family member can no longer drive themselves. But private medical transport does not idle in front of a residential address at 5:30 in the morning when the house is dark and nobody is being discharged from anything. I took out my phone and photographed the van, the license plate, the company name and number on the side panel. Then I opened my notes app and typed the plate number and the time 5:31 a.m. My phone showed 2 missed calls from Daniel from last night. I had not answered either of them. I looked at the van for a long time. In my years on the bench, I learned that the most important evidence was rarely dramatic. It was almost always mundane: a date that was wrong by 1 day, a signature in the wrong color ink, a vehicle parked somewhere it had no reasonable business being. Small things. The kinds of things that people forgot to hide because they didn't seem important enough to hide. A white van parked in front of a house at 5:30 in the morning was not dramatic, but nothing in my experience suggested an innocent explanation for it. I wrote down the MedVantage phone number from the side of the van. Then I turned off my phone screen and settled back in the driver's seat and watched the house in the gray early light. Whatever was in that house, it would have to come out eventually. I could wait. At 6:15, a gate opened on the side of the house next door. A girl came through it, 15, maybe 16, paint-stained hoodie sketchbook tucked under one arm. She turned toward the street and saw me sitting in my parked car. She stopped. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she walked straight toward me. Not cautiously, purposefully, the way someone walks when they have been waiting a long time for the right person to show up. She stopped at my window and knocked twice. I rolled it down. "Is that woman in there? Your wife?" she asked. Her voice was low and urgent, her eyes flicking toward Daniel's house and back to me. "The older woman. Is she yours?" "Her name is Vivien," I said. "I'm her husband." Something shifted in the girl's face, relief maybe, or the release of something she had been holding too long. "Sir, you need to call someone right now. She's in trouble, I saw her. She's locked in the shed in their backyard and she—" Her voice cracked slightly. She pressed on. "She didn't look okay. That was 4 days ago, and I don't think anyone's helped her since." I kept my voice level. "Get in the car." She came around to the passenger side without hesitating. Good. She had already decided. Once the door closed, she held the sketchbook tight in both hands and spoke quickly, like she was afraid she might lose her nerve. "My name is Juniper Pike. I live right there." She pointed at the house next door. "I go out back at night sometimes to draw. 4 nights ago I heard something from the back of their yard, like someone trying to call out but couldn't get the volume up. I went to the fence and looked through the gap, and there's a wooden shed at the far end, padlocks on the outside hasp." She paused. "She was inside it." "You saw her clearly?" "Yes, sir. There's a gap in the doorboards, maybe an inch wide. She saw me looking and she moved close to it. She said—" Juniper stopped, swallowed. "She said, 'Please, tell my husband, tell Walter,' and then she gave me a number." She opened the sketchbook to the inside front cover. A 10-digit number written in careful pencil. My phone number. "I tried calling that night," Juniper said. "It just rang. I tried the next morning too. I didn't know what else to do. I was scared to knock on their door, and I wasn't sure anyone would believe me if I called the police. I'm just—" She looked at me directly for the first time. "I'm just a kid who was looking through a fence at night. I didn't think that would be enough." "You did the right thing coming to me," I said. "Is she going to be okay?" I looked at Daniel's house across the street. The white van was still parked out front. The curtains were drawn on every window. "That's what I'm here to find out," I said. The morning hadn't fully decided what it wanted to be yet. Somewhere between gray and pale gold, the kind of light that made everything look like evidence. Juniper sat with her knees pressed together, her paint-stained fingers folded in her lap. She stared at the dashboard like she was deciding how much truth a stranger deserved. I gave her 30 seconds. "Tell me everything," I said. "From the beginning." She exhaled slowly. 3 nights ago. I couldn't sleep, so I went out back to sketch the moon. I do that sometimes when the house gets too loud." She paused. "I heard something. Real quiet. Like someone trying not to be heard." "From which direction?" "The shed at the back of their yard. The wooden one with the outside lock." She turned to look at me. It sounded like a woman. "What did she say?" Juniper's voice dropped. "She said my name. I don't know how she knew it. Maybe she'd seen me before over the fence." She swallowed. She said, "Sweetheart, please don't be afraid. I need you to write something down." My jaw tightened. I kept my voice flat. "And you wrote it?" "On my hand. 10 numbers. She made me repeat it back twice." Juniper glanced at her left palm out of habit, though the ink was long gone. She sounded so tired. Her voice kept breaking. But she remembered every digit. "Did she say her name?" "No." She just said, "Tell whoever answers that his wife needs him." I looked out through the windshield at the quiet street. A sprinkler 2 houses down was making lazy circles in the early morning. "You didn't call that night," I said. It wasn't an accusation, and I was scared. Her voice cracked slightly. I kept telling myself it was nothing, a misunderstanding. That's what my mom always says about the neighbors don't get involved. She pressed her lips together, but I couldn't stop thinking about her hands. They were shaking so bad. "You went back." She nodded. "Next morning before school. I brought a bottle of water and pushed it through the gap at the bottom of the door. She was still there. She thanked me like I'd given her something worth crying over." Juniper's eyes glistened. She still remembered the numbers. "Did she say anything else?" "She said, 'He'll come. I just need to hold on a little longer.'" The sprinkler stopped. The street went very still. "I called the number that night," Juniper said quietly. "Nobody picked up. I almost knocked on their front door, but—" She shook her head. "This morning I saw your car parked here and I thought—" "You thought right," I said. I looked down at my own hands resting on the steering wheel. Vivien had memorized my number through 10 digits on a stranger's palm. The number I had taped to the refrigerator, to her notebook, to every wallet she'd carried for 20 years. She knew I would come. She just didn't know if I would come in time. Task 2.5. I pulled up Daniel's contact for the Jacksonville Police non-emergency line, then stopped. I scrolled instead to a name I'd looked up 2 nights ago, Sheriff Harlan Webb, Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, District 4. Some preparations are habits. Old ones. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. Chief Buell. Raymond. Walter Renfield. Former Circuit Judge, 11th Federal District. I kept my voice even. "I'm sitting outside 4114 Heronwood Drive. My wife is being held in a locked outbuilding on that property. I have a direct eyewitness." A pause, then the careful kind of careful. "Mr. Gaines, I appreciate you calling. That property you said Heronwood. 4114. Yes. Sir, I want to be straightforward with you." His tone shifted into something rehearsed. "The family at that address, Hearthside Senior Consulting, they've been real strong partners with this community, sponsoring the Boys and Girls Club, the Senior Wellness Fair last spring. Your son, Mr. Gaines Daniels, well regarded here." "My son," I said, "is not the subject of this call. My wife is." "Of course. I just want to make sure we're not looking at a family misunderstanding before we—" Chief Buell. I used the voice I'd used when reading verdicts. Not loud, just final. "I have a 15-year-old eyewitness who made direct contact with my wife through a locked door over 3 consecutive days. My wife recited my phone number from memory and asked this child to call for help. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a report of unlawful detention." Silence. "I need you at this address," I continued. "Now. Not as a courtesy, as a legal obligation." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll send a unit over. Should be there within—" "I'll be waiting." I ended the call before he could finish the sentence. Juniper was watching me from the passenger seat. Her eyes were wide but steady. "He's sending someone," I said. "Do you think they'll believe me?" "But they will when they see the shed." I looked toward the house. The white Med Vantage van hadn't moved. The lights on the first floor were still on. "Can you show them exactly where it is without going onto the property until they arrive?" She nodded. "There's a gap in the back fence. You can see it from the alley." "Oh, good." I opened the car door and stepped out into the morning air. It smelled like cut grass and something chemical underneath, fertilizer maybe, or exhaust from a vehicle left idling too long. "Mr. Gaines?" Juniper said, still in her seat. I looked back. "She kept saying you'd come," she said quietly. "Every time I brought water. She kept saying it." I didn't answer. I looked back toward the house instead. Chief Buell would come. But not fast enough if that van decided to move first. The alley behind Heronwood Drive was narrow enough that the morning shadows hadn't lifted yet. Juniper led. I followed 3 steps behind my hand, trailing the wooden slats of the back fence. "It's here," she said, stopping at a section where 2 boards had warped apart. "You can see the cabin from this angle." I pressed close and looked through. The cabin sat at the far end of the yard, maybe 30 feet of overgrown grass between us. Small, wooden. A padlock hung on the outside hasp, still locked. Through the single narrow gap between the door and the frame, I could see a shape. Vivien was sitting with her back against the far wall, knees drawn up, head tilted forward. Her eyes were closed. "Vivien." My voice came out quieter than I meant it to. "Vivien." For 3 seconds, nothing. Then she lifted her head. She looked at me through the gap, the way you look at something you've been praying for, steady, like she was afraid if she moved too fast, I'd disappear. "You came," she said. Her voice was hoarse, barely there. "I knew you would." "I'm here," I said. "Don't move. Stay exactly where you are." "Walter." "I mean it. Don't touch the door." I straightened up and stepped back. Juniper was watching me. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. "She's okay?" she asked. "She's alert," I said. "That matters more right now." I pulled out my phone and dialed Chief Buell again. He picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Gaines, my unit is—" "I'm standing in front of a locked cabin at the back of 4114 Heronwood Drive," I said. "My wife is inside. The lock is on the outside. She did not put it there." I paused. "You need to be here now. Not your unit. You." A beat of silence. "I'm 5 minutes out," he said. 4 would be better." I ended the call. Juniper crouched down and spoke through the fence gap. "Mrs. Gaines, I brought him, like you asked." From inside the cabin, Vivien's voice came thin but clear. "I know, sweetheart. I heard him." I looked down the alley both directions. Empty. The MedVantage van was still parked on the street side. No movement from the house. I had handled 22 years of cases. Evidence logs, testimony transcripts, crime scene photographs. I had read enough pain in document form to last 3 lifetimes. None of it weighed what I was carrying right now, the image of my wife, through a 2-inch gap in a door that my own son had locked. I didn't say that out loud. There was no one to say it to. I just stood there in the alley and waited for the sound of a police vehicle turning onto Heronwood Drive. I had handled 22 years of cases. I had weighed every kind of evidence a courtroom could hold. But nothing was heavier than seeing your wife through the gap of a door your own son had locked. The patrol car pulled to the curb at 7:28. Chief Buell stepped out, first broad-shouldered, mid-50s, the kind of man who had learned to move slowly on purpose. Daniel was already on the front porch. He must have been watching from a window because he came down the steps with exactly the right amount of urgency. Not too fast, not too slow. His face was arranged into worry the way a man arranges furniture before company arrives. "Chief Buell." Daniel extended his hand. "Thank God you're here. This has been an incredibly difficult morning." Buell shook it. "Mr. Gaines, your father called." "I know." Daniel exhaled and pressed a hand to his forehead. "Look, I want to be up front with you. My mother, she's been having some confusion lately. Mild disorientation, her doctor mentioned early-stage memory concerns. Last night she wandered out to the storage cabin in the backyard, and when we found the door had latched from the outside, we decided the safest thing was to keep her comfortable until morning, rather than disturb her. She gets more agitated when she's rushed. Buell nodded slowly. I see. We were going to take her to see her physician this morning. We had an appointment scheduled. Daniel's voice was warm with concern. I understand why my father is upset. He drove through the night, he was scared. But she's safe. She's been safe the whole time. I had been standing 6 feet to Buell's left. I hadn't moved or spoken since Buell arrived. Daniel glanced at me now. It wasn't the look of a son reading his father's fear. It was the look of a man reading a room, measuring what I knew, how much I'd told the police, where the gaps were. I had seen that exact calculation on the faces of defendants for 2 decades. He was not worried about his mother. He was worried about his exposure. Juniper stood just behind my shoulder, quiet. She hadn't said a word since Buell arrived, but she was watching Daniel the same way I was. Mr. Gaines, Buell said, turning to me. Your son has offered an explanation. Do you want to respond? I'd like you to walk around to the back of the property, I said, before anyone responds to anything. Daniel's expression didn't break, but something behind his eyes shifted, a very slight recalibration. Of course, he said too smoothly. I'll show you myself. That's all right, I said. Juniper knows the way. Daniel looked at the girl for the first time. A beat too long. My son looked at me the way a judge looks at a witness, measuring how much I already knew. I had sat in that chair long enough to recognize the look from both sides of the bench. The padlock came off with one strike of Buell's bolt cutter. The cabin door swung open. Vivien stood in the frame, not collapsed against it, not reaching for support. She stood with her shoulders back, blinking against the morning light, her silver hair pressed flat on one side from leaning against the wall. She was wearing the same blue cardigan she'd packed for Jacksonville. She stepped out and found my arm. Her grip was firm. Vivien. Buell kept his voice gentle, the practiced tone of a man trained to speak to the elderly. Ma'am, are you hurt? Do you need medical assistance? I need water and breakfast, she said. In that order. He almost smiled. Then he reset his expression and glanced toward Daniel, who was standing at the corner of the house. Ma'am, your son mentioned you may have been experiencing some disorientation last night. Some confusion about... Vivien turned and looked at Buell directly. Badge number 741, she said. Grover County Sheriff's Office. Your name is Harlan Webb. You've been with this department 14 years. You made sergeant in your 9th year and transferred to this district in your 11th. She paused. I read your name tag and your badge when you came through the gate. I also noted that you parked 2 feet past the driveway edge, which suggests you were trained to leave room for a secondary vehicle. The yard went quiet. Buell stared at her. Does that sound like disorientation to you? She asked. I said nothing. There was nothing to add. Buell straightened slowly. He turned and looked at Daniel. This time the nod didn't come. Daniel's careful expression held but barely. His jaw had tightened by a fraction, the small mechanical failure of a performance running out of rehearsal. Chief Buell, I said. My wife has been in that cabin for at least 3 days. The lock was on the outside. She had no access to food or adequate water. The temperature last night was 51 degrees. I kept my voice even. I'd like to know what the next step is. Buell turned back to me. Something had shifted in his posture, less community liaison, more law enforcement. I'm going to need a statement from your wife, he said. "And I'm going to need everyone to remain on the property." He said it to both of us. But he was looking at Daniel when he said it. Juniper stepped forward and handed Vivien the water bottle she had been holding since the alley. Vivien took it with both hands. She looked at the girl for a moment, the way you look at someone you already know, even when you're meeting them for the first time. "Thank you," Vivien said quietly. "You came back." "Every day," Juniper said. Sheriff Webb looked at my son. This time he did not nod. The emergency room at St. Augustine Regional ran on fluorescent light and low-grade urgency. A monitor beeped somewhere behind the curtain to my left. A nurse adjusted Vivien's IV line and left without a word. Dr. Holloway 40's clipboard the practiced calm of someone who had delivered bad news enough times to make it look routine, stood at the foot of the bed. A dehydration, mild hypothermia, some bruising on her right knee from a fall. Nothing that won't resolve with fluids and rest. He looked at Vivien. "You're fortunate. Another night in those temperatures and we'd be having a different conversation." "I was aware of that," Vivien said. "You'll need to stay for observation. Minimum 6 hours." "Fine." She waited until he left, then looked at me. I was sitting in the chair beside her bed, her hand in both of mine. I hadn't let go since the cabin. "Walter," she said quietly, "I need to tell you what I found. You need to rest. I need you to listen first." She shifted against the pillow. "The basement. Their house has a finished basement. They called it a home office. But it wasn't just an office." I said nothing. I let her talk. Filing cabinets, a separate laptop that wasn't connected to their home network, printed contracts, real estate power of attorney forms, bank account transfers. She paused to breathe. "And names. So many names, Walter. People our age, people older." "How did you get down there?" Cyrilda left the door unlocked when she took Lily to her Tuesday class. "I had 20 minutes. She almost smiled. "I've been waiting for that Tuesday for 2 weeks." "You planned this." "I noticed things," she said simply. "I'm your wife. I've been watching people lie for 30 years. I squeezed her hand. "There was a folder," she continued, "separate from the others, thicker. It had our name on the tab." She met my eyes. "The Renfield case." I kept my face still. I photographed what I could with my phone before the battery died. Then I found the memory card in the laptop's side port. She reached up with her free hand and worked her fingers along the inner hem of her cardigan. A small rectangle of black plastic appeared between her fingers. She held it out to me. "I've been keeping it there for 3 days," she said. "I didn't know if you'd come in time, but I thought if they found me, at least they wouldn't think to check the seam." I looked at the card in my palm, the size of a thumbnail, the weight of nothing. She didn't just survive, I thought. She prepared. The monitor beside us kept its steady count. The memory card was no larger than my thumbnail. Vivien had carried it in the seam of her cardigan for 3 days inside a locked cabin. She hadn't just survived. She had come ready. I was still in the chair when I heard them in the hallway. Cyrilda came through the curtain, first dark coat hair, composed eyes moving in 3 directions at once, while her expression held steady at concerned. She was good. She had the kind of face that defaulted to warmth the way some people default to breathing. "Mr. Gaines." She touched my arm briefly. "We came as soon as we heard." "How is she?" "Resting," I said. Daniel came in behind her. He looked thinner than I remembered, or maybe that was the hospital light. He stopped at the foot of the bed and looked at Vivien sleeping, then at me. "Dad." His voice was low. "I'm sorry." I had no idea she'd go outside on her own that night. If I'd known, you couldn't have known, I said. He blinked. That wasn't the response he'd prepared for. The important thing is she's here, I continued. She's getting fluids. The doctor says she'll be fine. Oh, that's a relief. He exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. The gesture was almost natural. Almost. I just feel terrible about the whole thing. We should have checked on her more often. These things happen, I said. Cyrilda was watching me now. Not my face, my hands, my jacket pocket, the shape of anything I might be carrying. She was mapping the room the way I used to map a courtroom before a difficult witness took the stand. Is there anything we can do? She asked. We could stay, take shifts. That's thoughtful, I said. But I'll be here. You two should go home and get some rest. It's been a long morning. Daniel looked at his wife. Something passed between them, not words, just calculation. If you're sure, he said. I'm sure. Cyrilda turned toward the door, then paused. Mr. Gaines, did the doctors say anything about her memory, about whether she was confused during the night? There it was. They said she was sharp as a tack, I said. Remembered the attending physician's name after hearing it once. Even recited the badge number of the sheriff who came to the house. I smiled at her. Remarkable woman. Cyrilda's expression didn't change, but the quality of her stillness did. That's wonderful, she said. I watched them walk down the hallway, Daniel slightly ahead, Cyrilda half a step behind her head, tilted just enough to be thinking hard about something. I had sat on the bench for 22 years. I had learned to tell the difference between a person performing an emotion and a person managing a calculation. My daughter-in-law wasn't worried about Vivien. She was already running the numbers on what Vivien might have seen. Before I reveal what Vivien had been carrying in that hem for 3 days, comment the word cabin, so I know you are still with me. Please note some details in this story have been fictionalized. If you would prefer content presented differently, feel free to step away here. What matters is that the message reaches the right people. Martin Albright's office smelled the way it always had, old paper coffee left too long on the burner, and the faint presence of decisions that couldn't be unmade. He sat across from me at the small table he kept in the corner for exactly these kinds of conversations, the ones that didn't belong in front of his desk. The memory card sat in a reader plugged into his laptop. Neither of us spoke while the files loaded. All right, Martin said, finally adjusting his reading glasses. Walk me through what your wife told you. Basement office, separate network. She had 20 minutes while the house was empty. I watched the screen. She grabbed what she could. The first folder opened. Martin leaned forward. Real estate contracts, he said quietly. These are actual property transfer documents. He clicked through several. 7 different addresses, 5 of them signed with power of attorney. Keep going. He opened the next folder. His jaw tightened slightly. Bank transfer records, routing through. He squinted. 3 shell companies. 1 in Delaware, 1 in Nevada, 1 registered in the Cayman Islands. Standard layering structure, I said. What else? He opened a 3rd file, a scanned document. A letterhead I recognized, a medical practice in Jacksonville. Cognitive decline assessments, Martin said. Pre-signed? The physician's signature is already on the form. The patient name is left blank. He set his glasses down on the table. Walter. I know. This isn't a family matter anymore. It never was. I nodded toward the screen. There's one more folder. He opened it. A spreadsheet. Names down the left column, 14 rows. Ages in the next column. Property values in the next. Status codes in the last closed, pending, or active. Martin scrolled slowly to the bottom. Row 15. Our name. Our address. Property value estimated at 11.3 million. And in the status column, a note: highest value target priority close. Martin sat back in his chair and said nothing for a long moment. How long has this been running? He asked. Based on the earliest contract date, at least 3 years. And your son is the listed principal on Hearthside Senior Consulting. His name is on the registration. His wife built the operating model. I looked at the screen. She's the one who knows how the machine works. Martin picked his glasses back up, put them on, looked at the list again. I'm going to make a call, he said. To whom? A colleague, federal level. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. You spent 22 years putting people away, Walter. It's time to let someone return the favor. 14 names. And ours at the bottom, flagged in plain text: highest value target priority close. They hadn't hidden us. They had simply decided we were next. Martin had pulled 3 browser windows across his screen: county tax records, the Regional Development Authority's zoning map, and a PDF titled Lakeshore Corridor Master Plan Revised Proposal. I watched him read. A man who had practiced law for 31 years didn't need to say anything while he was thinking. Neither did I. All right, he said finally without looking up. Your property, 4.1 acres, lakefront, Grover County. Currently zoned residential. He tapped the zoning map. This boundary here. You're inside the proposed resort corridor. How proposed? Final review pending. The Development Authority votes in February. He leaned back. If it passes and the language suggests it will, your land rezones to mixed commercial hospitality. That changes the valuation considerably. How considerably? Current assessed value is $2.1 million. Post-rezoning comps in the same corridor are running between 10.8 and 12.2 million. He said it plainly, the way doctors say difficult numbers. Your son would have known this. Anyone doing basic due diligence on that property would have known this. He knew, I said. Martin opened the 4th file from the memory card. A scanned document, 2 pages, signatures at the bottom. Letter of Intent Property Acquisition. Hearthside Senior Consulting acting as authorized representative for Walter and Vivien Renfield. He signed as authorized representative, I said. He has no authorization. There is no power of attorney, no guardianship order, nothing. Martin set his glasses on the table. Walter, your son, accepted a deposit of $2.5 million from a real estate investor for a property he has no legal right to sell. Who's the investor? Martin scrolled down. A man named Vaughn Ashbury, private equity based in Atlanta. And the deposit already transferred. Hearthside's operating account received the funds 11 weeks ago. He looked at me. That money is gone. I'd be surprised if 40 cents of it remains. I stood up and walked to the window. The parking lot below was nearly empty. One streetlight had started to flicker. He can't give it back, I said. And he can't close the deal without ownership. Which means he needs ownership, Martin said. Which means he needs guardianship over you and Vivien. Which means, well, he needs us declared incompetent. Neither of us spoke for a moment. He has no exit, I said. None, Martin agreed. 2.5 million spent. Personal debt of $480,000 on top of that. And a signed contract with an investor who is expecting title transfer. He picked up his pen. Your son isn't running a scheme anymore, Walter. He's running out of time. A $2.5 million deposit already spent. $480,000 in personal debt underneath that. And a contract bearing the name of a man who had never once signed anything he didn't have the right to sign. Martin typed the plate number I had photographed into the commercial vehicle registry search. The result came back in under a minute. MedVantage Patient Transport. He read. Registered owner Malcolm Strayed. Operating license current, insured, bonded. He opened a second window. Strayed has a business address in Orange Park. Clean record. 12 vehicles in the fleet. He's not the problem, I said. Pull his dispatch logs if you can. I can't access those directly. Martin paused. But Vivien's documents might have something. He went back to the memory card. Fourth folder subfolder labeled Transport. One file inside a scanned scheduling form. MedVantage letterhead. Handwritten entries. Martin read it aloud quietly. Patient name Vivien Renfield. Pickup address 4114 Heronwood Drive, Jacksonville. Destination Sunrise Memory Care, 2280 Silver Springs Boulevard, Ocala, Florida. He stopped. Scheduled pickup time 7 o'clock a.m. I said nothing. Walter, that's today. I know. He looked at the timestamp on my parking lot photograph from this morning. You took this at 5:31 a.m. He looked back at the form. The van was already in position 90 minutes before scheduled pickup. They weren't leaving anything to chance. Martin took his glasses off and set them down carefully, the way he did when something required his full attention, without any mediation. Ocala is 100 miles from Jacksonville, he said. 97. If that van had left at 7 a.m., he stopped. Say it, I said. True, by the time you reached the house, by the time the sheriff arrived, by the time anyone started asking questions. He shook his head. She would have been admitted to a memory care facility under a cognitive decline assessment signed by a physician in another county, under Hearthside's guardianship application, which I now believe was already filed. The room was very quiet. Juniper called me at 11:47 p.m., I said. She had been sitting on that number for 3 days. She almost didn't call. Martin looked at me. 7 hours and 13 minutes, I said. That's the margin. He didn't answer. There wasn't anything useful to say. I walked to the window again. Somewhere out in the parking lot, a car started and pulled away. Ordinary sounds. The kind of night that had no idea what it had almost allowed to happen. We need to find out who filed the guardianship application, I said. And who signed the cognitive assessment. I'm already looking, Martin said quietly. 7 hours and 13 minutes. That was the distance between Vivien sitting beside me in a hospital room and Vivien disappearing into a facility 100 miles away with no one left who knew where to look. She arrived at 8:20, carrying a spiral sketchbook with a red cover and paint on the binding. The nurse at the desk had looked at her twice before waving her through. A 15-year-old in a paint-stained jacket wasn't the usual evening visitor profile, but she had asked for Mrs. Renfield by name, and Vivien had asked for her by name first. I was standing near the window when Juniper came in. I stayed there. You brought your book, Vivien said, sitting up slightly. I thought you might want to see. Juniper pulled the chair close to the bed and opened the sketchbook. This is the moon from 3 nights ago, the one I was drawing when I heard you. Vivien looked at the page for a long moment. A soft pencil rendering the lake, the shadows, a sliver of moon above the tree line. Done by someone who looked at things carefully. It's beautiful, Vivien said. You're talented, sweetheart. My art teacher says I have good instincts, but poor discipline. Your art teacher and I would disagree about what discipline looks like. Vivien turned the page. What's this one? The cabin. I drew it the next morning. I don't know why. Juniper paused. Maybe so I'd remember it was real. They were quiet for a moment. Juniper, Vivien said. Can I ask you something? Yes, ma'am. Were you scared when you decided to call? Juniper looked down at the sketchbook. I almost didn't. I kept telling myself it wasn't my place, that I was probably wrong. She was quiet. But I kept thinking about your hands shaking when you pushed the paper back to me. And I thought if I'm wrong, someone just gets a strange phone call in the middle of the night. If I'm right, then it matters enormously, Vivien said. Yes, ma'am, you did the right thing. Vivien reached over and put her hand briefly over Juniper's. And I need you to hear that from someone who knows the difference. Juniper nodded. Her jaw was tight the way jaws get when people are working hard not to cry. What's going to happen now? She asked. The right things, Vivien said simply. Walter will see to it. From the window, I watched them, the girl who had sat in the dark for 3 nights, deciding whether to make a phone call, and the woman who had survived long enough to be worth the call. I took out my phone and typed 2 words into my notes app. Juniper Pike. Not because I might forget. I would never forget. But because some names deserve to be written down. Because when this was finished, and it would finish, I already knew what I intended to do with that name. I just needed to get there first. Daniel came alone. No Cyrilda, no careful entrance, choreography, no synchronized performance. Just him in a gray jacket holding a paper coffee cup he hadn't touched, sitting in the plastic chair across from me in the hospital hallway. He looked tired. Genuinely tired, the kind that doesn't wash off with a night's sleep. How is she this morning? He asked. Better. Doctor says she can go home in 2 days if her levels stay stable. That's good. He turned the cup slowly in his hands. Dad, I need to say something. Go ahead. I handled things badly. He looked at the floor. When Mom started seeming disoriented, I panicked. I thought keeping her somewhere familiar, somewhere enclosed, would be safer than having her wander. I made the wrong call. I know that. I watched him. His posture was slightly forward, shoulders curved inward, the body language of a man trying to look smaller. You were worried, I said. I was. He looked up. I should have called you the moment she seemed off. Instead, I tried to manage it myself. That was wrong. Daniel, I kept my voice even. Your mother wasn't disoriented. A beat of silence. I know it can be hard to accept. She recited the attending physician's full name, his medical school, and the year he completed his residency after reading his badge for 4 seconds. I looked at my son. She is not disoriented. He opened his mouth, closed it. I'm not angry, I said. I want you to know that. These things get complicated. What matters right now is that she's safe and she's recovering. I stood up. You should go home. Get some sleep. You look like you need it. He stood slowly, still holding the cup. He looked at me for a moment, trying to read me the way he used to when he was 12 and had broken something and couldn't tell if I already knew. Is there anything I can do? He asked. Anything at all? Not right now. I'll call you when she's ready for visitors. I put my hand briefly on his shoulder. Take care of yourself. He nodded and walked toward the elevator. I stood in the hallway and watched him go, his pace, his posture, the slight hesitation, before he pressed the button. For 22 years, I had watched people walk away from a witness stand. You learn things from the way a person moves when they think the scrutiny is over, whether the shoulders drop with relief or stay braced for something still coming. Daniel's shoulders stayed braced. I had looked at my son across that plastic chair, the way I used to look at a witness through 2-way glass. And the worst part was not what I saw. The worst part was that I felt no surprise at all, only the quiet, terrible recognition of a man who had spent a lifetime learning to read people, finally turning that skill on his own blood. Rowena Quill arrived at Martin's office 12 minutes late, which I suspected was intentional, a small act of control from someone who felt she had very little left. She was 34, dressed conservatively, and carried herself with the practiced composure of someone who had been rehearsing this conversation in her head for a long time. She sat down across from Martin and looked at me once, then looked away. "Mr. Albright said you found my signature on the files," she said. "On 14 documents," Martin confirmed. "Property intake forms, cognitive assessment referrals, and 2 power of attorney preparation requests. I prepared those forms. I didn't falsify them." She folded her hands on the table. "At the time, I thought I was doing standard intake paperwork. Hearthside described it as administrative support for families managing elder care transitions." "When did that change?" I asked. She looked at me directly for the first time. "About 4 months in. I started noticing that the clients never seemed to have family present during intake. The assessments were always done by the same physician, Dr. Voss. His evaluations were fast. Too fast." She paused. "Then I saw a client file where the assessment was dated 2 weeks before the client had ever been in our office." "Predated," Martin said. Pre-signed. The date was filled in afterward." She uncrossed and recrossed her hands. "I asked Cyrilda about it. She said it was a processing error and it had been corrected. 2 weeks later, I was reassigned to data entry. A month after that, I resigned." "But you kept copies," I said. She met my eyes. "I kept copies because I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't sure what I'd witnessed. I kept telling myself I was probably misreading the situation." She stopped, and then I kept not being able to throw them away. "Why did you agree to come today?" Martin asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Albright told me that a woman named Vivien Renfield had been admitted to the emergency room, that she had been locked in an outbuilding on her son's property for 3 days. Rowena looked at her hands. "I've been carrying those files for 8 months, waiting for a reason that felt big enough. I think I was waiting for permission." "The woman in the emergency room is my wife," I said. She looked up. "She's recovering," I said. "But she wouldn't be if a 15-year-old girl hadn't made a phone call in the middle of the night." I paused. "You've been sitting on bona fide evidence of a multi-victim fraud operation. You're not responsible for what happened. But you have an opportunity now to be part of stopping it." Rowena reached down and lifted a manila envelope from her bag and set it on the table. "I made 3 copies," she said. "One for you. One I mailed to myself certified still sealed. One is with my sister in Savannah." She looked at Martin. "I'm not naive. I know what I signed. I need to know what that means for me." Martin leaned forward. "That depends entirely on what you're willing to say and to whom." She nodded slowly. "Then let's talk about what I'm willing to say." Rowena Quill had kept those files for 8 months, not knowing what to do with them. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't require courage first. Sometimes it only requires someone to ask. The address Martin had for Odessa Mare was a converted motel on the western edge of Jacksonville, the kind of place that had stopped being temporary for most of its residents long before they arrived. Room 9. Ground floor. A wreath on the door made of dried flowers that had probably been bright once. Odessa answered before I finished knocking. She was 78, small-framed with white hair pinned carefully, and eyes that moved to Martin first, then to me, and stayed. "You're the judge," she said. "Former judge," I said. "Walter Renfield. This is Martin Albright, my attorney." "Come in." The room held a single bed, A round table with 2 chairs and a shelving unit lined with framed photographs. No television. A kettle on the windowsill. It was clean and orderly and smaller than my garage by a considerable margin. She gestured to the table and sat across from us. On the floor beside her chair was a cardboard box, closed, taped shut along the top. "Mr. Albright said you found my name in a file," she said. "We did," Martin said. "We believe you were a client of Hearthside Senior Consulting approximately 2 years ago." "Client," she said the word flatly. "That's one way to put it." "Can you tell us what happened?" I asked. She looked at the box for a moment, then back at me. "My husband passed in 2019. The house was mine, 41 years we lived there. 3 bedrooms, half-acre lot, 3 blocks from my church." She said it the way people describe things that no longer exist. "About 18 months after Howard died, a woman came to see me. Young, very well dressed. Said her company helped seniors manage their estates and reduce stress. She seemed kind." "Cyrilda," I said. Odessa nodded once. "She came 3 times over 2 months. Brought paperwork each time. Said it was routine documentation protecting my assets in case of incapacity." She paused. "On the 3rd visit, she brought a man she introduced as my new care coordinator. He brought coffee and a pastry. It was very pleasant." Her voice remained even throughout. "I signed 4 documents that afternoon. I don't remember signing the last 2. Martin and I said nothing. I woke up the next morning feeling strange, slow, like my thoughts were moving through something thick." She looked at her hands. 3 weeks later, I received a letter from a title company saying my property had transferred. My bank accounts had a new authorized signatory, and there was a letter from a physician I had never met stating I had moderate cognitive decline and required supervised living. "Did you try to contest it?" Martin asked. "I tried for 14 months. Every lawyer I spoke to said the same thing. I had signed the documents. They were notarized. There was a medical assessment." She met my eyes. "They didn't take my house first. They took away my ability to make anyone believe me. The house was just the paperwork." She reached down and lifted the cardboard box onto the table, set it between us. I kept everything. Every letter, every form, every envelope with a postmark." She folded her hands in her lap. "I didn't know what good it would do, but I didn't know what good throwing it away would do either." I looked at the box. Then I thought about 13 other names in a spreadsheet and what they might be carrying in their own boxes in their own rooms somewhere. "Mrs. Mayer," I said, "what you've kept may be the most important evidence in this case." She looked at me steadily. "Then let's make sure it counts." Martin had been on the phone for most of the morning. I sat across from him and drank 2 cups of coffee and waited. When he finally set the phone down, he didn't speak immediately. He pulled a legal pad toward him and drew 3 boxes connected by arrows. "Vaughn Ashbury," he said, tapping the first box. "Private Equity Atlanta. Clean public profile, legitimate real estate portfolio, no disclosed connection to Hearthside." He tapped the second box. "Ashbury Capital holds a 40% stake in a company called Meridian Land Partners, registered in Delaware." He tapped the third box. "Meridian's managing member is a man named Cole Madron, age 43, based in Savannah." "Who is Cole Madron?" I asked. Martin looked at me over his glasses. "Cyrilda's first cousin. Her mother's sister's son. No shared last name, no mention in any public filing, no listed relationship anywhere in Hearthside's incorporation documents." I set my cup down. "How did you find it?" Rowena's copies included an internal org chart from Hearthside's first year of operation. Madron's name appeared once in a footnote as an unnamed advisor. I ran it from there. Martin folded his hands. The incorporation date of Meridian Land Partners is February 14th, 2019. That's 6 months before Cyrilda and Daniel's wedding. Yes. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, a truck passed on the street below, and the window glass shivered slightly. She came in with this already built, I said. The framework was in place before the marriage. The marriage gave her access to your family name, your son's signature authority, and proximity to your assets. Martin paused. Daniel is listed as Hearthside's principal on every public document. His name is on the letter of intent to Ashbury. His signature is on the deposit receipt. But the money went to Madron through Meridian. Correct. I stood up and walked to the window. The legal pad sat on the table with its 3 boxes and its arrows pointing in one direction. Daniel thought he was running the company, I said. To some degree, I believe he was. He recruited clients, he managed relationships, he signed the contracts. Martin was careful with his next words. But the financial architecture was built by someone else before he was ever part of it. That doesn't make him innocent. So no, Martin agreed. It doesn't. He knew what the company was doing. He signed documents he knew were fraudulent. He stood in that yard and lied to a sheriff. He paused. But it does mean that someone made very specific calculations about your son before she ever became your daughter-in-law. I thought about the boy Daniel had been, at 12, earnest, easy to impress, the kind of child who wanted approval badly enough to work for it, and badly enough later to stop working and look for shortcuts. My daughter-in-law planned this before she married into my family, I said. That doesn't absolve my son, but it explains a great deal. Martin nodded slowly. It also tells us something about what she's willing to do when the plan is threatened. The call came on a Thursday afternoon while I was sitting in the hospital room watching Vivien sleep. I stepped into the hallway before I answered. Dad. Daniel's voice was warm, deliberately warm, the kind of warmth that requires effort. How are you holding up? You sound tired. I'm fine. Just been a long few days. Of course. Of course it has. A brief pause, not hesitation, recalibration. How's Mom doing? Is she eating better every day? She had soup this morning and kept it down. That's great. That's really great to hear. Another pause, shorter. Hey, I've been thinking you've got a lot on your plate right now. Managing the hospital visits, dealing with all of this. If there's anything practical I can help with, I appreciate that. Like paperwork, for instance. I know you mentioned something about needing to update the property documentation for the trust review. I know you usually keep the originals in the safe at home. His voice remained easy, conversational. If you need me to drive up and grab anything, I'm happy to do that. Save you the trip. I looked at the wall across from me. A watercolor print of pelicans over a marsh. The kind of art that exists to give people somewhere to rest their eyes. That's thoughtful, I said. But I remember now I already took care of it before all this happened. Dropped everything with Martin weeks ago. A silence, shorter than he wanted it to be. Oh. The warmth recalibrated again smoothly. Well, that's one less thing to worry about then. Smart thinking. I've had a lot of practice, I said. We talked for another 4 minutes about nothing, the hospital food, the weather in Jacksonville, whether Vivien's sister should be called. Daniel said all the right things in all the right order. When we hung up, his voice was still warm. I stood in the hallway for a moment and looked at the pelicans. 3 weeks ago, on the night I had driven Vivien to her sister's for what should have been a routine weekend visit, I had stopped at Martin's office on the way back, dropped the entire contents of the home safe into a transfer envelope, original deed, vehicle titles, the trust documents, every signed financial instrument I owned. Martin had logged them in at 11:42 p.m. The safe at home had held nothing but an old insurance renewal notice and a flashlight with dead batteries since. My son had just spent 4 minutes building up to asking me about papers that had been sitting in a lawyer's file cabinet for 3 weeks. I went back into the room and sat down next to Vivien. She stirred but didn't wake. My son was hunting for something that had been gone before he ever started looking. He didn't know that yet. And the longer he didn't know, the more clearly I could see exactly what he intended to do when he found it. Martin spread the printed pages across the table in a sequence left to right, chronological. The email chain in the memory card has a subject line, Phase 2, Renfield, he said. 7 messages. The earliest is dated 3 weeks before Vivien's visit to Jacksonville. Before she was even invited, I said. It's incorrect. He pointed to the first page. The initial message is from an account registered to Hearthside's administrative address. It outlines 2 scenarios. He read from the page. Scenario A, subject complies during visit, signs, documentation, transfer proceeds on schedule. Scenario B. He paused. Subject does not comply or situation becomes compromised. Proceed to secondary acquisition pathway. Secondary acquisition pathway. You, Martin said simply. He moved to the second page. A form, the Hearthside cognitive assessment template I had seen before, pre-printed with Dr. Voss's signature already in the lower right corner. The date field was blank. The patient name field read Walter R. Renfield. I looked at it for a long moment. The narrative in Scenario B, Martin continued, is that you suffered a psychological breakdown following the traumatic discovery of your wife's situation. Acute stress response, possible early cognitive impairment triggered by emotional crisis. He looked up. It's actually quite plausible on paper. You drove through the night, you found your wife incapacitated, you confronted your son. Anyone reading that file cold would find the clinical picture coherent. What was the filing strategy? Emergency guardianship application in Duval County. Hearthside would position itself as the neutral care management party, with Daniel named as co-petitioner. Martin set his glasses down. Under Florida's emergency guardianship statute, an application can be filed and a temporary guardian appointed within 72 hours if the petitioner can demonstrate imminent risk to the subject. Meaning they needed me to look unstable. Meaning they needed you to do what any reasonable father would do, arrive in a state of distress, make emotional accusations, and give them 48 hours of behavior they could document. He sat back. A judge reviewing an emergency filing sees a distraught elderly man making serious allegations against his own son, a physician's assessment, indicating cognitive fragility, and a care management company offering structured support. That's not an unusual picture. It's a very common picture, I said. I've seen versions of it. I know you have. From the bench. Yes. I looked at the form with my name on it. Dr. Voss's signature sat in the corner, patient and waiting the way a blank check waits. They prepared for both outcomes, I said. If Vivien signed, they had the property. If she didn't, if I arrived and made noise, they had a contingency that turned my response into evidence against me. You would have walked into a trap built from your own grief, Martin said quietly. I thought about what would have happened if Juniper hadn't called. If I had arrived at that house in a state of panic rather than preparation. If I hadn't moved those documents 3 weeks ago. They filed paperwork to put me in a care facility, I said, before I even knew I was being hunted. Martin said nothing. There was nothing useful to add. I picked up my pen and turned to a clean page on the legal pad. It was time to stop reading their plan and start writing mine. I called Daniel on a Monday morning and kept my voice slightly flatter than usual, not enough to alarm, just enough to register. "I've been thinking," I said. "All this tension between us, it's not good for anyone, especially your mother. I'd like to sit down with you both. Somewhere neutral. Just talk." A pause. Then, "Yeah. Yeah, Dad. I think that would be good. Really good." We met at a restaurant called the Whitmore, 40 minutes from the hospital. White tablecloths, the kind of place Daniel liked, visible, respectable, where being seen mattered. They were already seated when I arrived. Cyrilda stood to greet me, both hands warm smile. Daniel half rose from his chair. I sat down slowly and looked at the menu for longer than necessary. "This is nice," I said. "I haven't been somewhere like this in—" I paused, staring at the menu. "What did your mother and I used to call that place on Magnolia Street? The one with the blue awning, Hargrove's," Daniel offered. "That's it, Hargrove's." I nodded slowly, as though the word had taken effort to receive. "Good fish there." Cyrilda was watching me over the rim of her water glass. Not obviously, just consistently. We ordered. I asked the server twice about the salmon, whether it was fresh or frozen, and apologized the second time, saying I had forgotten I'd already asked. The server was gracious. Daniel said nothing. Cyrilda touched her napkin. Midway through the meal, I set my fork down and looked at Daniel. I wanted to say, "I know things have been strained. Whatever happened with your mother, I believe you were trying to help. I've been holding on to the wrong things." I shook my head slightly. "At my age, you start to realize what matters." Daniel leaned forward. "That means a lot, Dad. It really does. I stopped. Let the pause extend 2 beats longer than natural. "I'm sorry, what was I saying?" "You were saying what matters," Cyrilda said. Her voice was gentle, calibrated. "Right, yes." I waved my hand mildly. "Memory's not what it was. The doctors say it's nothing serious. Stress, probably." I looked at my plate. "Your mother worries." Cyrilda set her fork down very quietly. "Are you sleeping all right?" she asked. "Eating properly? It must be exhausting managing all of this alone." "I manage," I said. "Martin helps with the paperwork. Good thing I have him. I'm not sure I could keep all of it straight myself anymore." Daniel looked at his wife. It was a fast look, half a second, but I had been watching for it. It was not the look of a son worried about his father's health. It was the look of a man receiving a confirmation. I picked up my coffee cup and took a slow sip. Cyrilda began asking me questions, gentle, caring questions, about my daily routine, whether I was driving myself, whether Vivien's discharge had been complicated. She made notes on nothing visible, but I could see her filing each answer away. Phase 2 was no longer a plan on a memory card. It was happening at this table between the salmon and the dessert menu. I had watched my son look at me like a man who had just seen a door swing open. He thought he was winning. I had counted every step it took him to get here. The hotel room was quiet, in the way rooms are quiet when you're the only one in them and you know it. I sat on the edge of the bed with the light off for a while before I lay down. Sleep wasn't coming. It rarely did when I was running the tape. The thing about memory is that it doesn't always wait for you to invite it in. I was 12 years old the first time I covered for someone I loved. The image came the way old memories do, not narrative, not sequential, just a texture. The smell of scorched wood, the principal's office, the particular weight of a checkbook in a jacket pocket. His name was Mr. Greer. He had the face of a man who had heard every explanation a parent had ever invented and was willing to hear one more. The fire investigator believes it was deliberately set, he said. The accelerant pattern is fairly clear. I appreciate you telling me that. I had kept my voice steady, the same voice I would use on the bench 30 years later. I believe it was an electrical fault in the storage panel. I've already spoken with a contractor who confirms the wiring in that building was substandard. I'll cover the restoration cost in full. Greer looked at me for a long moment. Mr. Gaines, I'll have a check to your office by Friday. He accepted it. They usually did. On the drive home, I rehearsed what I would say to Daniel. I would be measured. I would explain consequences. I would make him understand. But when I walked into the kitchen and saw him at the table 12 years old, still small in the chair, looking up at me with those eyes that were always waiting to see which version of me had come through the door, I said something different. I said, "It's handled. Don't do anything like that again." He nodded. He went back to his homework. I told myself I had protected him. I told myself the lesson was implicit, that he had seen me manage the fallout, that he understood the weight of what I had done. What he understood was something else entirely. He understood that when Daniel Renfield set fire to something, his father arrived and made it disappear. He understood that the checkbook was faster than the consequence. He understood that love in our house looked like intervention. I stared at the ceiling of the hotel room. Somewhere in Jacksonville, my son was probably awake too. Running numbers, calling Cyrilda, planning the next step of a scheme that had grown from a dozen small lessons I had taught him without meaning to. I had spent 22 years on a bench, making sure strangers answered for what they had done. I had written opinions on personal accountability that were cited in appellate courts. I had told juries that the measure of a just society was its willingness to hold the powerful to the same standard as everyone else. And then I had gone home and told my 12-year-old son, "It's handled." The room was very dark and very quiet. I had been a judge for 22 years. I had given fair sentences to strangers. But with my own son, I had taught him in a kitchen in 1999 that he was allowed to be wrong without paying for it. I had been writing that permission slip his entire life. The hospital parking lot at 4 in the afternoon had a particular kind of quiet cars coming and going, but none of it urgent, none of it here for good news. Daniel was leaning against the hood of his car when I came through the glass doors. He hadn't been visiting Vivien. He had been waiting. "Hey." He pushed off the hood and fell into step beside me. "She looked better today." "She did," I said. We walked toward my car without discussion, the way people do when they've known each other long enough that movement doesn't need narration. "Can I say something?" Daniel asked. "Go ahead." He stopped walking. I stopped a half step after him. "You've always looked at me like that," he said. "Like you're waiting for me to do something wrong, even when I was a kid." He kept his voice measured, not angry, just observational, like a man presenting a fact. "Every time I came to you with something, I could see it. That look." I waited. "I used to think I was imagining it," he continued. "But I wasn't. Was I?" It was not quite a question. I looked at my son. At the set of his jaw, the way he was standing with his weight slightly back-braced, but performing casualness. He was watching my eyes the way you watch someone's eyes when you're listening for a specific word. He was not here to make peace. He was here to see whether I remembered. The warehouse. The phone call to the principal. The check. He wanted to know if there was still a lever. "I've made mistakes with you," I said. "That's true. And I've thought about them more than you know." I held his gaze. "But I don't look at you like you're about to do something wrong, Daniel. I look at you like I love you and I'm tired. He searched my face. That's it, he said. That's it. He nodded slowly. The bracing in his posture didn't release it, recalibrated. He had come here testing a theory, and the data hadn't confirmed it. He would file that and try something else. Okay, he said. I needed to say it. I'm glad you did. I put my hand briefly on his shoulder the same way I had in the hospital hallway weeks ago. Go home. Be with Lily. That's what matters right now. I watched him get in his car and pull out of the lot. For 27 years, I had been the man who arrived after the fire and made it disappear. Daniel had come here today to see if that man still existed, if there was still a version of his father he could use. The last time I protected my son from consequences, he was 12 years old, and the building was a warehouse behind a school. This time the building was my house, my wife, and 14 people in a spreadsheet. I was not going to make that call again. Martin called while I was still in the parking lot. I didn't start the car. I just sat with the phone against my ear and watched a family cross the crosswalk in front of me, a man pushing a wheelchair, a woman holding a child's hand, everyone moving at the speed the slowest person needed. The FBI made contact with Dr. Voss this morning, Martin said. I have the summary. Tell me. His full name is Dr. Cedric Voss, licensed physician, private practice in Ponte Vedra Beach. Clean record, no prior disciplinary actions, no history of fraudulent billing. Martin paused. He received an approach approximately 9 months ago from a woman representing herself as an intake coordinator for something called the Coastal Elder Wellness Consortium. He had not heard of the organization, but she provided a letterhead, a Florida nonprofit registration number, and 2 references, both of which, when checked, appeared legitimate. She built a shell identity, I said. A good one. He met with her twice. She explained that the consortium provided cognitive wellness evaluations to support family caregivers managing estate transitions. She described it as a humanitarian initiative. She asked whether he would be willing to serve as a participating physician. And he agreed. He was paid a modest consulting fee, $200 per assessment form. He was told the assessments were pre-reviewed by a clinical team and that his signature served as a professional endorsement rather than a primary evaluation. Martin's voice was careful. He signed 11 forms over 8 months. He never met a single patient. I let that sit for a moment. When the FBI showed him the forms, I said, what was his response? How he asked to see them individually. He identified his signature on each one. He then asked the agents how many people had lost their homes. And when they told him, he asked what he needed to do. Outside, the family had reached the other side of the crosswalk. The man with the wheelchair said something that made the woman laugh. Ordinary life happening in parallel. He's cooperating fully, Martin continued. He's prepared to testify that Cyrilda, under her false identity, contacted him the first time 6 weeks before Vivien's scheduled visit to Jacksonville. I looked at the dashboard. 6 weeks, I said. The date is documented. He still has the initial email. 6 weeks before Vivien had ever been invited to Jacksonville, before Daniel had made that first phone call about the trust papers, before any of it had been set in motion. Visibly, Cyrilda had already been meeting with a physician to prepare the paperwork for what came next. This isn't improvisation, I said. No, Martin said. It's a calendar. I started the car but didn't pull out yet. 6 weeks prior, a physician who thought he was helping families. 11 signed forms. 14 names in a spreadsheet. My daughter-in-law had not reacted to a crisis. She had scheduled one. The 3 of us sat around Martin's conference table at 7 in the evening. Martin on my left, Special Agent Brennan on my right, a legal pad in front of each of us, and a recording device in the center that nobody was pretending wasn't there. Brennan was 41 compact, with the particular stillness of someone trained to wait. He had reviewed the memory card files, the Rowena Quill deposition, the Dr. Voss cooperation agreement, and the Odessa Mayor documentation over the preceding 72 hours. He came prepared. "Walk me through the signing ceremony structure," he said. I turned my legal pad to face the table. "Daniel will call me. He'll say Cyrilda has arranged for a family estate consultant to walk through the property transfer paperwork, routine documentation, trust administration, nothing alarming. He'll frame it as doing me a favor." "How do you know he'll phrase it that way?" "Because that's how Cyrilda framed it to Dr. Voss. She uses the same language architecture every time." I looked at Brennan. "I've read 3 years of her email correspondence. She has a pattern." Brennan made a note. "Proceed." "I attend. I appear cooperative but slightly confused, consistent with the cognitive profile they've been building since the restaurant meeting. I ask clarifying questions that seem like they come from disorientation. I let the consultant walk me through the documents. At what point do we move? Not until he says it." I set my pen down. "The documents alone are conspiracy and fraud. We have that already. What I need is for Daniel to say on record that he understands what he's asking me to sign and why. I need his knowledge confirmed in his own voice." Brennan looked at me. "You're describing a confession. I'm describing an inevitability." I looked at the recording device. I've watched people sit across from me for 22 years. The moment they believe the verdict is going their way, the moment they think the outcome is secured, they say the thing they've been holding back. They can't help it. Winning loosens the tongue. Martin leaned forward. "What if he doesn't say it directly?" "He will, but if he doesn't..." I turned to Brennan. "Cyrilda will. She's the architect. She'll want him to hear the plan confirmed correctly. She'll correct him if he understates it." I paused. "She won't be able to resist explaining how well it worked." Brennan was quiet for a moment. "You've designed this the way you'd design a cross-examination," he said. "I've designed it the way I'd design a verdict." I picked up my pen again. "I need them to walk in thinking they've already won. I need the room to feel like a closing ceremony. And I need your team outside, not visible, not audible until I give the signal." "What's the signal?" "I'll say I think I need to read this one more time." I looked at both of them. Nobody who's confused says that. It's the one phrase that sounds like hesitation, but requires complete presence of mind. They won't catch it. Brennan looked at the legal pad for a moment. Then he nodded. "I've sat on that bench for 22 years, I said, and watched people confess, not because they were forced to, but because they couldn't bear to stay quiet when they thought they had won. My son is not different from any of them." I set my pen down. "Let's build the room." The bench near the hospital's east garden faced a row of crepe myrtles that had been trimmed back for winter. Lily sat beside me with her knees together and her sneakers not quite reaching the ground, the way small people sit on benches built for larger ones. 20 feet away, Vivien was standing near the entrance doors, talking with Daniel. She had been discharged that morning. She looked thin but upright, and she was doing most of the talking. Daniel was nodding. "Grandpa." Lily tugged my sleeve. "Do you want to watch something?" "What are you offering?" She unzipped her backpack and produced a tablet older model scratched case, a small sticker of a yellow fish on the back corner. "I have the Penguins movie, and Mama said I could bring it." "The Penguins movie sounds serious." "It is." She settled the tablet on her lap with the confidence of someone who had operated this particular device for years. It used to be at the cabin. I looked at her. What cabin? The one at our house. Daddy said it was a storage place, but I used to sit in there and watch movies when it was too loud inside. She scrolled through a folder of thumbnails. I left it there for a while. Then I forgot about it. Then I found it again after everything. She said it the way children say things sequentially without emphasis, as if all events hold equal weight. Was it on when you found it? I asked. My voice was careful level, the voice I used when a witness was about to say something they didn't know was important. It was out of battery, but when I charged it up, she frowned at the screen. There's a video I don't understand. Of Grandma. She was crying a little. Lily looked up at me with the mild concern of someone reporting a strange weather event. Do you want to see? Yes, I said. I'd like to see that. She pressed play without ceremony. The screen showed the inside of the cabin, gray light wooden walls, the floor I had seen through the gap in the fence. Vivien was in the corner, both hands around a folded piece of paper, her lips moving. Behind her, partially in frame, was Cyrilda. Standing. Speaking in a voice just low enough that the tablet's microphone had captured the tone without every word but enough. Enough to show proximity. Enough to show presence. Enough to show that Vivien was not alone in that room by accident. Vivien's hand was shaking. Cyrilda was pointing at the paper. The video was 47 seconds long. I sat very still on the bench and watched it twice. Is Grandma okay? Lily asked. She's okay. She's right over there. I handed the tablet back gently. Can I borrow this for a little while? I'll give it back before you go home. Okay. She zipped it into her bag. Do you still want to watch the penguins? Maybe after, I said. Lily, 8 years old, had just handed me what any prosecutor in the country would classify as direct evidence of coercion. She thought she was showing her grandfather a movie. The conference room at Martin's office held a long table of dark oak, 8 chairs, and a view of the parking structure across the street that nobody had ever found inspiring. I arrived first and sat at the far end. By 9:15, the room was full. Daniel came in with Cyrilda. He was wearing a jacket I hadn't seen before, dark navy, well-fitted. The clothes of a man who expected today to go well. He pulled out a chair near the middle of the table and gestured for Cyrilda to sit first. Vaughn Ashbury arrived 2 minutes later. 41 Atlanta tan, the practiced ease of someone whose schedule was managed by other people. He shook Martin's hand and nodded at me with the particular courtesy you extend to someone you're about to acquire something from. The last to sit was Lucian Greaves, the accountant, 52 reading glasses, already on a slim leather portfolio open in front of him. He had the energy of a man who had done this kind of paperwork before and expected to be home for dinner. 4 people. 4 different relationships to what was happening in this room. Martin laid the documents across the table in sequence: property transfer forms, trust amendment paperwork, a notarized statement of consent. Greaves had prepared a summary sheet. Ashbury uncapped a pen. Mr. Renfield? Ashbury said, looking at me with something that was almost warm. I want you to know we're committed to making this transition as smooth as possible for you and your wife. The development plan will honor the character of the land. That's good to hear, I said. I looked at the first document. I let my eyes move slowly across the page, the kind of slowness that reads as age rather than attention. This is the property boundary description, I asked. That's correct, Greaves said. The legal description of the parcel consistent with the county assessor's record. And this number here. I pointed to a figure that was accurate and unremarkable. That's the assessed value. Current assessed value, yes. The market consideration is outlined on page 3. I turned to page 3. Read it. Turned back to page 1. Daniel shifted in his chair. Cyrilda was watching my hands. I turned to page 2 and stopped. I had run this exact movement in my mind for 3 days. The pause here. The slight forward lean. The expression of a man trying to reconcile something without quite managing it. 22 years of watching people perform competence from the bench had taught me precisely what its absence looked like from the outside. I want to make sure I understand the trust amendment section, I said. Martin, can you? Of course. Martin reached across and indicated the relevant paragraph. I read it. Looked up. Around the table, 4 people were waiting, each one at a different level of patience, each one with a different calculation running underneath. Ashbury wanted to close. Greaves wanted to leave. Daniel wanted me to sign. And Cyrilda was watching all of us. I held the pen above the signature line and did not move. I had sat at the high end of a courtroom for 22 years, looking down at people who thought they knew how the day would end. Today, I was sitting at the same level as everyone else, but I was looking at them exactly the same way. My son's eyes said he thought he had already won. I had seen that look enough times to know the confession was minutes away. I set the pen down and looked at the trust amendment section again. I'm sorry, I said. The language here about primary residence designation, does that affect Vivien's right to remain on the property after transfer? I want to make sure she's protected. Greaves looked at Ashbury. Ashbury looked at the document. The transfer includes a standard residential carve-out, Greaves said. Your wife would retain right of residence for 12 months post-close. It's outlined in subsection 4. I see it, I said. I just want to be certain she's not put in a difficult position. After everything she's been through recently. I looked at the page. She's been through quite a lot. Daniel exhaled, barely audible, but there. Dad. His voice was patient, managed. The terms are fair. Martin has reviewed them. Vivien is going to be well taken care of. I know. I picked up the pen again, turned it in my hand, set it down. I think I need to read this one more time. The room held its breath. Daniel looked at Cyrilda, that half-second calculation. She gave the smallest nod. He leaned forward and put his hand on my forearm, the same hand-on-shoulder gesture he had used 3 times now. Familiar, reassuring, slightly too deliberate. Just sign it, Dad, he said, dropping into the cadence we used between us when he was trying to reach me rather than perform for the room. Everything's going to be fine. This is the right thing. He paused. Mom should have signed earlier, back when she was still at the cabin. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Nobody at the table moved. Greaves stopped writing mid-word. Ashbury looked at the window. Cyrilda's expression did not change, but something behind it did, the quality of stillness that comes when a person realizes they have just watched a door close. I did not look up from the document. Daniel seemed to feel the silence enter the room a half-second after it arrived. His hand was still on my forearm. I just mean, he started. I know what you mean, I said quietly. Martin set his pen down on the table with a small, deliberate click. Daniel removed his hand from my arm. In the silence that followed, I heard exactly what I had been waiting for, the soft sound of a latch releasing on the other side of the wall. Not dramatic, just a door doing what doors do when someone turns the handle from the correct side. The room stayed very still for one more moment. Then I heard footsteps. Agent Brennan came through first. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. The credentials were visible before he cleared the doorframe, and the second agent, a woman late 30s moving with the unhurried authority of someone who had done this before, positioned herself near the far end of the table without being asked. For 2 seconds, nobody spoke. Cyrilda stood up. It was the first thing she did, and she did it cleanly, no fumble, no intake of breath, no performance of surprise. She had calculated this possibility into the plan the way a careful architect calculates load-bearing walls. She rose from her chair with the composure of someone who had already decided what she would say to her attorney. Cyrilda Renfield. Brennan said, "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges including wire fraud, elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and unlawful restraint." She looked at him. "I'd like to call my lawyer." "You'll have that opportunity." Daniel had not stood up. He was still sitting, both hands flat on the table, looking at me. Not at Brennan, not at the agents, at me. Vaughn Ashbury pushed back from the table and rose halfway, before the second agent said simply, "Please stay seated, Mr. Ashbury." He sat back down with the deflated compliance of a man who had never genuinely planned for this outcome. Greaves didn't move at all. He closed his portfolio, removed his reading glasses, and set them on top, the gesture of a man tidying a desk at the end of a very long workday. I was still at the head of the table, pen in hand, nothing signed. Daniel's eyes hadn't left me. "Dad." His voice was different now, stripped of management, stripped of calculation. The voice of the 12-year-old who had looked up from the kitchen table, waiting to see which version of his father had come through the door. "Dad, just Daniel Renfield." Brennan stepped around the table. "You're under arrest." The handcuffs went on quietly. Daniel didn't resist. He stood when he was told to stand and walked when he was told to walk. At the door, he stopped, not long, not dramatically, just a fraction of a second, and looked back at me. I did not look away. It would have been easier to study the table, to find something necessary to read in the paperwork in front of me. 22 years on the bench had taught me that looking away was a mercy that defendants rarely received and rarely deserved, and sometimes needed more than anything else. I owed my son at least that much. I watched him until the door closed. Then I set the pen down on the unsigned documents and sat in the silence of a room that had just become evidence and thought about a boy who had learned the wrong lesson in a kitchen in 1999 and the long, terrible distance between that kitchen and this room. Justice was not a victory. It was a door closing, and I had been the one to hold it open. The courtroom on the 4th floor of the Duval County Courthouse was not the room I had worked in for 22 years. That room was in Georgia, and it had been someone else's for a long time now. But a courtroom is a courtroom. The wood paneling, the elevated bench, the particular way sound flattens itself against the walls. These things don't vary much. I had spent the better part of my adult life inside rooms like this one, and I had never once sat where I was sitting today. 3rd row, left side behind the bar, below the bench, looking up. The assistant district attorney, a woman named Colleen Marsh, had called me the week before. "Mr. Renfield, you're not required to attend the cooperation hearing, but I want you to know you're welcome to. Some families find it useful. Some find it harder than they expected." "I'll be there," I had said. Daniel took the stand at 9:45. He was wearing a gray suit that didn't quite fit the suit of a man who had lost weight since the last time he'd needed to dress for something formal. His attorney sat at the defense table with the practiced stillness of someone billing by the hour. Marsh led him through it methodically. When did Hearthside Senior Consulting begin operations? How were clients identified? Who designed the cognitive assessment documentation process? Who made contact with Dr. Voss? Who arranged the MedVantage transport scheduling? Who moved money through Meridian Land Partners? Daniel answered each question in a flat, even voice. No hesitation. No editorializing. The voice of a man who had rehearsed this testimony not to perform it, but to survive it, who had decided somewhere between the arrest and this morning that honesty was the only transaction left that still had value. Whose idea was the original plan? Marsh asked. Cyrilda's, Daniel said. She approached me before we were married. She said she had a business model for senior estate management. She made it sound like consulting. I didn't understand what it was until we were already running. When did you understand what it was? Daniel was quiet for a moment. When she told me about the first client who had lost her house. She said it like it was a milestone. And you continued. Yes. Why? He looked at his hands on the railing of the witness stand. Because I was already in, he said. And because I thought I could manage it. Keep it from going too far. He stopped. I was wrong about that. Marsh moved on. The testimony continued for another 5.5 hours. I sat in the third row and listened to my son describe in precise procedural detail the full architecture of what he and his wife had built together. He named everyone. He dated everything. He explained the logic of each step the way a man explains a route he drove so many times he no longer needed to think about the turns. I had heard enough testimony in my life to know the difference between a man performing remorse and a man reporting facts. Daniel was reporting facts. Whatever he felt about those facts, he had decided to keep to himself. That at least was something I recognized. My son sat on the witness stand and described every step of the plan in a voice that did not waver. In 30 years of courtrooms, I had learned what it looked like when a person had made their decision before they walked through the door. He had made his. The sentencing hearing for Cyrilda Renfield was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in October, which meant the trees in the courthouse square were beginning to turn, and the air outside had finally surrendered its summer weight. I sat in the second row this time. Odessa Mayer sat beside me. She had taken the bus from the converted motel on the west edge of the city. She was wearing a dark blue coat and carrying the cardboard box on her lap, the same box she had placed on the table in her small room 3 months ago. Her victim impact statement was inside it, handwritten on 3 pages of lined paper. You don't have to hold that the whole time, I said quietly. I know, she said. I want to. Cyrilda was already at the defense table when we filed in. She was sitting straight, dressed conservatively, her expression arranged into the neutral composure she had worn at every appearance since the arrest. If she had felt anything change in the preceding 3 months, she had not let the courthouse see it. Her attorney delivered the mitigation argument in 20 minutes. First-time offender. No prior criminal record. Character references, expressed remorse. The assistant district attorney took 12 minutes to respond. She read from the victim impact statements, 7 in total, submitted by survivors and families of the 14 documented victims. She read Odessa Mayer's last. They did not take my house first, Marsh read aloud. They took away my ability to make anyone believe me. The house was just the paperwork. The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Hollister, 64, 21 years on the bench, a man who chose his words the way surgeons choose instruments, looked at Cyrilda for a long moment before he began. The court has reviewed the evidence extensively, he said. What distinguishes this case is not the scale of the financial harm, though that harm is severe and affected 14 documented individuals over a period spanning 3 years. He paused. What distinguishes this case is the deliberateness of the methodology. The defendants spent weeks, in some cases months, building relationships of trust with elderly victims before initiating the process of stripping them of their assets and their legal standing. She used the appearance of care as a mechanism of control. He looked at his notes. This court has processed a great many fraud cases. This is among the coldest and most calculated I have presided over. He picked up the sentencing document. On the charge of attempted murder in the second degree, 20 years. On the charges of organized scheme to defraud elder, financial exploitation, conspiracy, and unlawful restraint, sentences to run consecutively. Total 28 years. Minimum 22 years before consideration for parole. The gavel came down. Cyrilda did not turn around. Odessa Mare sat beside me with the cardboard box in her lap and did not make a sound. Not relief, not release. Just the steady, settled quality of a person who had waited a long time for something to be acknowledged and was now sitting inside that acknowledgement. I did not cry either. Some things are too large for tears and too necessary for celebration. 28 years. The gavel fell and the room breathed. Beside me, Odessa held her box. Neither of us cried. Some forms of justice don't arrive with fanfare. They arrive the way a long overdue payment arrives, quiet, final, and not enough to give back what was taken. Daniel's sentencing was on a Thursday morning 3 weeks later in the same courtroom before the same judge. He had no mitigation argument beyond the cooperation agreement itself, which was substantial. 6 hours of testimony, full disclosure of the financial architecture, named co-conspirators, documented transactions. The cooperation had been by every legal measure complete. Judge Hollister acknowledged it plainly. The court recognizes the defendant's significant cooperation with federal and state prosecutors. The information provided was material verifiable and directly enabled the prosecution of multiple co-conspirators. He reviewed the document in front of him. The court also recognizes that cooperation does not constitute absolution. The defendant was not an unwitting participant in this scheme. He was a knowing principal. He looked at Daniel. 14 years, minimum 10 years before consideration for parole. Daniel nodded once, the nod of a man who had done the arithmetic and found the number where he expected it. His attorney said a few words into the record. The clerk noted the time. The procedural machinery of the courtroom moved through its final rotations. Then the officer stepped forward to take Daniel to holding. Daniel stood. He looked toward the gallery. He found me in the second row. Dad. His voice was low, just loud enough to cross the bar. You're going to let them do this. You saved me before. You can do it again. His jaw was tight. You know you can. I stood up. The room was quiet in the way rooms get when everyone present understands that what is happening does not belong to them. I looked at my son across the polished floor of a courtroom I had never sat in before this month, in a city I had driven through the night to reach, and I said what I had been carrying for 3 months without knowing it was ready. Last time I saved you, I said. This time I'm saving your mother. He looked at me for a long moment. I don't know what he was looking for. Regret, maybe. A crack in the decision. Some residue of the man who had written a check to a principal in 1999 and told a 12-year-old boy that it was handled. If it was there, I didn't show it to him. The officer touched his arm, and he turned and walked toward the side door. He did not look back. Neither did I. I picked up my jacket from the seat and walked out the main doors into the October morning. The trees in the courthouse square had finished turning. The sky was the particular blue that appears only after the humidity finally breaks clean and high and indifferent to everything happening below it. Vivien was waiting in the car at the curb. She didn't ask how it had gone. She could tell from the way I walked. I got in. She put her hand over mine on the console. We sat there for a moment without speaking. Then I started the car. I did not look back at the courthouse. Some doors, once you've closed them properly, don't require a second look. The back porch faced east, which meant the morning light came in low and sideways and turned the surface of the lake into something that looked less like water and more like a decision not yet made. I had been out there 20 minutes before Vivien came through the door. She was wearing the green robe she had owned since before Lily was born, moving carefully the way she still moved in the mornings, not from pain, the doctors said, but from the body's reasonable habit of caution after what it had been through. She had a mug in each hand. She set one in front of me without asking and sat down in the chair to my left. For a while we just watched the fog. "You slept?" she said. It was not quite a question. "Better than I expected," I said. "You, mostly." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I dreamed about the cabin once. Not a nightmare. Just I was in it, and then I wasn't. Good ending. Good enough." She looked at the lake. "The light's coming back. I keep noticing that. Every morning a little more. January does that eventually. I used to take it for granted." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't think I will anymore." The fog was moving off the water in long, slow sheets. Below it, the lake was flat and dark and entirely itself. "Walter," Vivien said. Are we going to sell the house?" I looked at her. She was still watching the water. Her expression thoughtful and settled, the expression of someone who has already worked through a question and is now simply delivering the conclusion. "Do you want to?" I asked. She considered it in the way she considered things, not quickly, not slowly, just thoroughly. "Not because of them," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not leaving because Daniel and Cyrilda happened here. They didn't happen here. They happened in Jacksonville." She turned her mug slowly in her hands. "But I keep sitting in the living room and thinking about what we want the next part to look like. And I think it looks different from this. Different how, smaller maybe, closer to the water but less of it to maintain." She almost smiled. "I'm 67, Walter. I'd like a porch I can actually keep up with. This porch is perfectly manageable. You haven't cleaned the gutters since September. That's a September problem. It's January." She laughed, a small, real laugh, the kind that doesn't need an audience. I had not heard it in several months, and it landed somewhere in my chest with the quiet weight of something returned. "Oh, so yes," she said. "I think we sell, when we're ready, on our terms at our price, to someone who will actually use the land." She looked at me. "And I think we do something with the proceeds that means something." "I have some thoughts on that," I said. "I know you do. I saw the name in your phone." I looked at her. "Juniper Pike," Vivien said simply. "I read it when you were driving me home from the hospital. I didn't say anything because I wanted to see how long it would take you." She picked up her mug. "It took you longer than I expected. I was working up to it. You were being careful." She leaned back in her chair. "It's the same thing with you." The fog had nearly lifted. The lake was coming clear in the morning light, cold and still and completely open. We would sell the house. Not because they had taken something from us. Not because the memory was too heavy to carry. But because starting somewhere new was not the same as losing ground. Sometimes it was the only honest way to choose what came next. Spring in Jacksonville arrived the way it always did, without asking permission, turning everything pale green and insistent almost overnight. The Pike house was on a quiet street 3 blocks from the school. Two-story white siding, a front yard with a magnolia that had probably been there longer than the house. Vivien carried the tin of lemon pound cake she had baked that morning. I carried the letter. Juniper opened the door before we reached the steps. She was taller than I remembered. Or maybe the hospital parking lot at 6 in the morning had compressed everyone into smaller versions of themselves. She was wearing a paint-stained sweatshirt and had the look of someone who had been interrupted mid-project, slightly distant, then gradually present. "Mr. and Mrs. Renfield," she said. "You didn't have to. We wanted to," Vivien said. "May we come in?" Her mother, Patricia, appeared behind her in the hallway, a woman in her mid-40s with Juniper's same careful eyes, and waved us inside with the warm efficiency of someone who always had the kettle going. The kitchen smelled like coffee and turpentine. On the wall beside the refrigerator there were 7 drawings pinned in an uneven row pencil and charcoal, all of them night scenes. Trees, a roof at moonrise, a stretch of fence with light coming through the gap. I recognized the fence. "Juniper did those," Vivien asked Patricia. "She's been doing them since October," Patricia said, setting mugs on the table. "She goes out back most nights now. I used to worry. Now I think it's just how she processes things." "It's how she sees things," Vivien said. Juniper sat across from us at the kitchen table with the self-containment of a person who was not quite sure they deserved to be the subject of a visit. She wrapped her hands around her mug the same way Vivien had wrapped hers on the back porch. "How is your wife?" she asked me. "I mean, how are you both? Now that everything is better," I said. "Genuinely better." She nodded. "Juniper," Vivien said, "I want to say something, and I need you to actually hear it. Not be polite about it. Just hear it." Juniper looked at her. "What you did, calling that number, coming to the car, telling a stranger what you saw, that isn't a small thing. A lot of people would have told themselves it wasn't their place." Vivien's voice was even. "You didn't tell yourself that." Juniper looked at the table. "I almost did. I sat on the number for 3 days. I know. You told me." Vivien reached across and touched the back of her hand briefly. "The almost doesn't matter. You called." "I just heard a sound," Juniper said quietly. "That's all I did. I just didn't ignore it." I looked at the drawings on the wall, the fence in the moonlight, the gap in the boards rendered in careful charcoal lines, the same gap I had looked through to find Vivien. "That's all that was needed," I said. Patricia refilled the mugs. Outside, the magnolia was just beginning to open. We stayed for nearly 2 hours. Juniper showed Vivien her sketchbook, the full one, not just the pages she had brought to the hospital. Vivien sat beside her at the table and turned pages, slowly asking questions about line weight and shadow source, the way you talk with someone when you want them to know that what they make has value. I sat across from them and watched. Juniper Pike, 15 years old, out after midnight drawing the moon, who heard a sound and did not ignore it, who called a number she had written on her hand, who had no idea what she was doing and did it precisely right. The part that mattered most was that she hadn't known it mattered. The sale closed on a Wednesday morning in April. Martin had handled the transaction from the beginning, listing negotiation title transfer. The buyer was a conservation land trust, which meant the 4 acres would be preserved rather than developed. The resort corridor rezoning had passed in February as expected, which meant the value had settled at exactly what the documents in Vivien's memory card had projected. $11,400,000. Martin slid the settlement sheet across the table. "Net of fees and taxes," he said, "you have approximately $9.8 million to work with." "We know what we want to do with it," Vivien said. Martin uncapped his pen. "Walk me through it." I had written the outline on a legal pad 2 weeks earlier in the same handwriting I had used for 30 years of bench notes. Vivien had added 3 items in the margins. We had gone back and forth on the proportions over dinner twice. 3 allocations, I said. First, a legal defense fund for elder financial abuse victims in Florida and Georgia, administered through the State Bar Foundation, initial capitalization of $4 million. The mandate includes representation for people who can't afford attorneys and don't qualify for public legal aid. Martin wrote. Name of the fund, the Odessa Mayor Elder Justice Fund. He looked up. I nodded. She should know, Vivien said simply. She will, Martin said. Second allocation. $2 million to the University of Florida nursing program, I said. Restricted for curriculum development in elder abuse identification and clinical response. There's a department chair who has been trying to build that program for 6 years without funding. Martin made a note. And the third, I set my pen down. A scholarship fund for students in visual arts, fine arts, or related creative disciplines. Annual awards renewable preference for first-generation college students. I paused. To be named the Juniper Pike Scholarship for the Arts. Martin looked at the legal pad for a moment. Does she know? He asked. She will when she receives the letter, Vivien said. Walter's writing it by hand. Martin looked at me over his glasses. You know she's going to be overwhelmed. I know, I said. That's all right. She can be overwhelmed. She's 15. She has time to grow into it. Martin completed the documentation in 40 minutes. We signed where required. He would file the foundation paperwork with the state by end of week. As we stood to leave, Martin set his pen down and looked at both of us. I've been a lawyer for 31 years, he said. I've processed estates, divorces, property disputes, and more bad family news than I can count. He paused. This is the best meeting I've had in a long time. Don't get sentimental, I said. You're still billing by the hour. He smiled, the real kind, not the professional kind. Outside, the April morning was doing what April mornings do in the south, warm at the edges, still cool in the shade. The kind of day that cannot quite commit to a season. We walked to the car, and I thought about a name on a scholarship plaque. A girl who painted night skies. A magnolia opening on a quiet street 3 blocks from a school. $11.4 million. The number they had planned around. The number Cyrilda had put at the top of a spreadsheet under the heading Highest Value Target Priority Close. It was going to pay tuition for students who hadn't been born yet. It was going to put Odessa Mayor's name on a foundation that would exist after both of us were gone. It was going to fund nurses who would be trained to recognize what had happened to 14 people whose names were in a column on a memory card that Vivien had carried in a hem for 3 days. They had tried to take everything. What they had actually done was tell us exactly what it was worth and exactly where to send it. The new house was on a street with sidewalks. That was the first thing I had noticed when we looked at it. Not the floor plan, not the kitchen, not the proximity to Martin's office or Vivien's church. Just the sidewalks. Wide, even shaded by oaks that had been there long enough to lift the concrete slightly at the roots. The kind of street you could walk without planning to. We moved in on a Saturday in late June. By Monday morning, we had not unpacked the guest room, and I still couldn't find the colander, but the coffee maker was operational, and the 2 chairs we had brought from the old back porch fit perfectly on the new front one. Vivien came out at 7:15, 2 mugs bare feet on the painted boards. You're already out here, she said. Woke up early. She handed me a mug and sat in the chair to my left, the same position as always, the geometry of 41 years. The yard was small. a square of grass, a border of garden beds that the previous owners had maintained with more enthusiasm than expertise, and along the south fence, a row of flowering plants with broad yellow blooms that neither of us had been able to identify. We had looked them up twice and gotten two different answers. "I think they're black-eyed Susans," Vivien said. "The app said coreopsis." "The app is wrong." "You don't know that." "I know what black-eyed Susans look like, Walter. I've been gardening longer than you've been a judge. You retired from gardening. I'm unretiring." She took a sip of her coffee and looked at the flowers with the proprietary interest of a person who had already decided they belonged to her. "I'm going to put in a raised bed along the back fence. Tomatoes, maybe some herbs. In August, for next spring. You plan ahead." She looked at me. "You of all people should understand planning ahead." I looked at the yellow flowers along the fence. The morning sun was hitting them at an angle that made each petal translucent at the edge, lit from behind, full of light. They hadn't generated themselves. "Do you miss it?" Vivien asked. "The lake?" "Any of it." I thought about the back porch facing east, the fog coming off the water in January, the particular sound of 4 acres of trees in a night wind. "Sometimes," I said. "The light was different there." "It was," she agreed. "This is different light. Not worse." "No," she said. "Not worse. Just different." We sat with that for a while. The street was quiet, a dog being walked by a man in a yellow rain jacket, a child on a bicycle with training wheels, the ordinary unhurried traffic of a Tuesday morning, on a block that had no reason to know our names. I had not thought about the courtroom this morning. Had not thought about the conference room or the moment I heard footsteps behind the wall or the look on Daniel's face when the door opened. Had not thought about a cabin at the end of a yard or a memory card in a hem or a number written on a 15-year-old's hand. I had thought about whether we had enough coffee and whether the yellow flowers were coreopsis or black-eyed Susans. Vivien put her hand over mine on the armrest. "Better?" she asked. I looked at the garden, at the light on the flowers, at the sidewalk where a child had just managed for a moment to balance without the training wheels. "Better," I said. "Sometimes protecting what matters does not mean holding on to it. Sometimes it means knowing when to let go and finding somewhere better to set it down." We had done that. And sitting here with coffee still warm and a yard full of flowers whose name we couldn't agree on, that was enough. It was exactly enough. There is something I have carried since that October morning in the courthouse. Something I did not expect to find at the end of all of it. I spent 22 years on a bench delivering justice to strangers. I was fair. I was thorough. I believed in the law the way some men believe in God, with quiet daily practice without needing it to be loud. But inside my own home with my own son, I set that standard aside. I told myself it was love. Looking back, I think it was fear of being the kind of father who could not protect his child. And in trying to protect him from consequences, I took away the only thing that might have made him better. Do not do what I did. If you love someone, truly love them, let them carry what they have earned. That is not cruelty. That is the truest form of respect. I believe God puts certain people in certain places at certain moments, for reasons we rarely understand until much later. A 15-year-old girl going outside to draw the moon. A phone number remembered through 3 days of exhaustion and fear. These are not coincidences. They are the kind of grace that does not announce itself. This is one of those grandpa stories that I never intended to tell. But family story after family story has taught me silence protects no one. If even one person hears this and holds their documents a little tighter, moves them to a safer place, pays attention to the questions that are not quite questions, then it was worth saying out loud. If this grandpa story stayed with you, leave a word below. Pass it to someone who might need to hear it. And if you want to sit with more family stories like this, stay close, there are more worth telling. Thank you for staying until the end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements built with care and told with purpose. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, this is a good place to step away and find something that suits you better. There is no judgment in that. Only the hope that wherever you land, you find something true.